Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session. Thank you for joining. My name is Sulaiman Adejumo, and today's session is titled Code Architecture for Beginners trying to move to intermediate level. And what we're really talking about here is, organizing code so it stays clean and manageable as your project begins to grow. So many people can write code that works. It's not about doing things that work, but when a project start getting bigger, it starts to feel messy and hard to understand, right? So this is usually not because of personal lack of skills. It's just because the structure was not planned from the start. And in this session, I just want to show how to think about, how you basically think about coding in layers and steps. So instead of everything being mixed together, jam-packed, so that way your project will begin to feel easier to read, easier to fix, and easier to improve over time. So the talk is aimed at beginners who are starting to feel more confident and want to move forward, writing more organized, professional-looking code, and without jumping into advanced framework or complex pattern. And just to remind you, the goal is not perfection. The goal is progress. So moving from writing code that only works to writing code that is also easier to manage. Right. So let's move on. And so who is this session for? This session is designed for a few specific groups of people, and you might find that you fit into more than one of them, basically. So first one, this is for beginners who are starting to feel stuck. Basically, you can write code, you understand the basics, but your projects start to feel confusing. And once they grow beyond a few lines, you start to get things mixed up. So secondly, the session is also for developers who notice that their projects are becoming messy, files grow too large, logics are mixed together. Coming back to the code after like a short break feels uncomfortable, right? And the third group of people is for anyone growing beyond just writing small scripts. And you might be moving from simple examples to real projects, and suddenly things don't feel as simple as they were before. So if you've ever thought, this works, but I don't like how it looks inside, then this session is definitely for you, right? And so the ideas we'll be covering today are meant to help you move from small single file thinking to a more organized structure that can support bigger projects, basically. So let's move on. And so what we do actually mean by code architecture. At a basic level, code architecture is simply how you code, how your code is basically organized. And it's not just about fancy tools or advanced patterns. It's about where things live and how they are managed, right? So it also includes how your files and functions are structured together, which code goes into which file, how responsibilities are separated, how functions are broken into smaller pieces so they are easily managed. And another important part of code architecture is readability as your project begins to grow. So when a project is small, almost any structure can work really. But as soon as you start adding more features, more files, and coming back after like a short break, so poor structure becomes very, very obvious. So good architecture helps your project stay readable, even when it's starting to get bigger, and you can quickly understand what each part does, where to make changes, how everything connects. Okay, so instead of just thinking architecture as is something that is like advanced or intimidating, so if it helps Just think of it as a simple plan, like a blueprint that keeps everything organized as you start to build. Right. And this slide answers an important question. Why does architecture even matter? So you say, the first reason is that projects grow faster than we expect. So most projects, start small, maybe just a few lines or a simple idea. But once you start adding new features, you're trying to fix bugs or you're responding to feedbacks, things can grow really quickly. And the second reason is that messy code slows down development, right? So when everything is mixed together, small changes take longer. Excuse me, and you begin to spend more time searching for code, trying not to break things, or you're feeling unsure about where to edit, basically. So, and the third reason is that a clean structure saves you time and effort. When your project is organized, you can move faster with less stress while coding. So fixes are, of course, easier. Updates will feel safer without fearing breaking your code. And understanding your own code becomes even simpler. So good architecture does not mean writing more code. It just is simply writing code that you know that works in a way that helps you instead of working against you, right? And yeah, so this describes what most people experience at the beginner stage. It's perfectly normal. At the beginning, many projects have everything in one file. HTML, styles, logic, JavaScript, all of that live together because it's faster and easier at first. But as your project begins to grow, functions also tend to become long and crowded. So instead of a small focused functions, one function, starts doing many things at once. And another common habit at this stage is copying and pasting. Many people use websites, AI, just go in there, copy and paste. So when something works, it's tempting to duplicate it instead of organizing it properly. So the result of all of this is that the code becomes hard to understand later. Even the person who wrote it can feel confused when coming back after a short break. So this stage does not mean you're bad at coding. It just simply means you are ready for the next step, and which is learning how to organize your code for the better. And so this represents what I like to call the turning point. This is the moment where small changes start breaking things. You edit one part of the code and something completely unrelated suddenly stops working. So at this stage, many people develop a fear of touching old code. Even when you know that something needs to be fixed, you hesitate because you're not sure what might break. So another common experience is confusion when returning to the project. So for example, after a few days or weeks away from coding, the code no longer feels familiar, even though you wrote it yourself. Get what I mean? So this is usually the moment where people realize that the problem is actually not their ability, but the structure of the project itself. And this is exactly where learning basic code architecture becomes really, really important. So let's move on. And at this point, the most important change is not a tool, but a new way of thinking. So the first idea is structure before features. Instead of rushing to add more functionality, you take a moment to decide where things should live and how they should be organized. And another key idea is one file, one responsibility. So each file should have like a clear purpose. When the file does one thing really well, it becomes easier to understand and easier to maintain. And finally, the mindset will shift. The mindset shift is, choosing readability over clever code, right? Readability over cleverness. So code is, read more often than it is written. So clear, simple code that you understand is far, far more valuable than complex code that looks impressive. So this mindset makes your project calmer and to work on, and reduces the stress that comes with the growth. All right. So one of the simplest ways to improve your architecture is by splitting responsibilities into separate files, as we've mentioned. So many beginners at this stage start with a single script file, and that's completely fine at the beginning. But as the project grows, that one file is doing too many things, right? So a small upgrade is to separate concerns into clearer files. For example, we have scripts.js. Uh, for example, we have data.js, can handle like data or configuration. UI.js can be responsible for updating what the user sees. Logic.js can manage decisions and rules. And the main.js can, act as the entry point that connects everything together. So instead of using everything in scripts.js, you can split them into these categories, and they have responsibilities on what they do for each of them, right? So nothing complicated is happening here. Each file just has like a clear purpose, and together they form like a really clean structure, right? So this approach makes it easier to find code, easier to make changes, and easier to understand what part of the project does what, is responsible for what. And so you're not just writing more code, you're simply organizing it better, right? So, and once the responsibilities are separated into files, the next step is to, organize them into folders. For example, using a simple source folder, SRC folder, helps group all your main code in one place. Inside it, folders are created based on responsibility, not size or complexity. So a data folder can, hold anything related to data, such as static files or data handling logic. The UI folder can contain code that updates the interface or handles the display. The logic folder can, focus on how the application behaves and makes its decision. And the utils folder is useful for small helper functions that are reused in different places, basically. So this structure makes it really easy to navigate the project as it grows. And, instead of scrolling through long files, you can go directly to the area that you need. And basically, the goal is clarity. So when you open the project, you should quickly understand what each folder is for without, reading the code inside it, right? And that's what we're trying to achieve here. So, and another important part of clean structure, clean architecture, is how you write your functions. Okay, so instead of writing large functions that do many things, it's better to think of functions as small building blocks. Okay, so if a good function should be small and easy to read from top to bottom, and it should be focused on, the meaning that it does one thing and does it really well. So functions should also be reusable. If you find yourself copying the same logic in different places, that logic probably belongs, in its own function instead. So most importantly, functions should be easy to understand. So yes, you should be able to tell what a function does just by reading its name and few lines inside the function. Okay. So when functions are written this way, your code becomes easier to test, easier to change, and less likely to break when you add new features or you're trying to manage it. Okay, let's move on. And as people start learning about architecture, it's also easy to fall into new mistakes. So one common issue is over engineering. So this happens when a project um, becomes more complex than it needs to be, especially at a pretty early stage. And another mistake is creating too many layers. Okay, so too many folders, files, or abstraction can make a simple project harder to understand instead of easier. So, we talked about breaking things into folders, into files. When it becomes too much, that can also be a problem, right? So some developers also start copying patterns without understanding them. So they see examples online and apply them without knowing why they exist or when they are actually useful, right? So good architecture is not about using every pattern available. It's just about choosing the most simple structure that solves the problem you have right now. And clarity should always come before complexity any day. Okay. So right. So the key takeaways to finish, I want to leave you with these few key ideas to remember. First, code architecture is about clarity, not complexity. The goal is to make your project look uh, is not to make it look advanced, but to make them easy to understand and to work with, right? So code when your code is organized, it becomes easier to read and easier to change. Okay, so you spend less time searching for things and less time worrying about breaking something, and separating responsibilities into clear files and folders also help your project stay manageable as it grows. Each part has one purpose, and that purpose is easy to recognize and to manage. Okay, so using small functions, small focused functions instead of long scripts, makes your code calmer and more predictable. It also makes reusing and testing much simpler as well. So it's important to improve structure gradually. So you don't need to get everything right at the start. Good structure evolves as your understanding of the project grows. Okay, so all of this leads us to one important outcome. Clean architecture builds confidence and reduces fear. Okay, so you feel more comfortable opening your own code and making changes, right? So with good structure in place, moving from beginner to intermediate becomes smoother and far less stressful, right? And let's move on. So yeah, thank you all for your time and for listening. And I hope this session has helped you in a way or two. I hope it's helped make code architectures feel less intimidating and more practical. And the goal was to show that clean structure is something that you can start using right away, even with simple projects that you may have. So if you take one thing away, let it be this: organize your code in a way that makes it easier for yourself to understand and change later. Okay, so thanks again for joining, and that'll be the end of the session. Thank you.